Tonight, we are not going to race through the Victorian age as though it were a list of odd facts pinned to a museum wall. We are going to slip into it quietly. We are going to wake inside it, not in the loud parts, not in the mills, not in the rail yards, not in the clatter and soot and striving that made the 19th century so restless, but in the softer rooms where that restlessness was covered with lace, polished with beeswax, and turned into the appearance of order. You are in Victorian England now, in a world of curtains, coal fires, calling cards, neat gloves, stern wallpaper, and rules so fine and so numerous that they seem to drift through the air like dust in morning light. And that is the first thing to understand about this age. The rules are not waiting for you outside. They are already in the room. They are in the way the curtains are opened. They are in the angle at which you sit up in bed. They are in the correct depth of a nod, the quietness of a spoon, the proper way to butter toast, the proper hour to call, the proper subject for conversation, the proper color to wear when grieving, the proper flower to send if you wish to say something that society will not let you speak directly. To modern eyes it can all seem a little absurd, and it was absurd at times, but it was also sincere and anxious, and strangely beautiful in places, because beneath every overcomplicated custom was a very ordinary human wish, the wish to seem respectable, the wish to belong, the wish to control embarrassment, before embarrassment controlled you, the wish to dress uncertainty in silk and call it composure. So tonight, let us move slowly through one full Victorian day, from the first dim light in a respectable house to the hush of evening when the fires burn low and all those rules soften at last into sleep. If the story feels gentle, let it be gentle. If it feels peculiar, let it be peculiar. And if now and then it feels a little funny, that too belongs here, because the Victorians were never quite as solemn as their portraits suggest. They only wished very badly to appear so. You wake in a bedroom where the air still holds a little of the night. The room is not large by the standards of the truly grand, but it is carefully arranged, and careful arrangement was one of the great arts of the age. Heavy curtains frame the window. A washstand waits near the screen. A chair holds yesterday's folded garments or today's prepared ones. A small fire, if the household can afford it, gives off the faintest warmth. The wallpaper repeats itself in patient vines and faded flowers. The basin on the stand catches a pale gleam from the earliest morning light. There is a smell that belongs especially to the Victorian house at dawn. Coal smoke, yes, very faint from the street beyond. But inside, there is also starch, old wood, polished brass, linen, and the last trace of lavender water from the night before. It is a room that does not wish to surprise anyone. It wishes to reassure, to contain, to smooth, and even before you have fully woken, that smoothing has begun. A servant may have moved quietly along the corridor already. Someone in the kitchen is awake, somewhere below. Water is being heated. A maid may soon appear, not dramatically, not with the bright intrusion of a modern alarm, but with the measured tact of someone trained to make necessity seem delicate. Because in a proper household, the morning is not allowed to stumble into being. It must be composed. You sit up beneath blankets that feel heavier than modern bedding, though perhaps less soft. The mattress gives in a different way too, more resistant, more built than cloud-like. You gather the warmth around your shoulders for a few moments longer, because the room beyond it remains cool. Even with a fire, Victorian houses knew drafts as intimately as they knew etiquette. They were full of corners, doors, passages, and practical imperfections that no amount of taste entirely solved. The floorboards are not the floorboards of a modern apartment. They creak less from neglect than from age and use, and the very old habit of wood adjusting to weather. Somewhere far off, another door closes. Somewhere below, crockery shifts. Somewhere in the house, another person has begun another day, under another set of expectations. This is not yet the public part of the morning. This is the suspended part, The part before the social self is tied on the washstand, a jug of water waits, chilled unless the household has gone to great trouble. Beside it lies soap, brushes, cloths, perhaps a bottle of scent if the family is prosperous and not too morally severe. The Victorians thought much about cleanliness, and almost as much about whether too much attention to the body might reveal an unfortunate vanity, or worse, an unfortunate enjoyment. So even this private moment carries faint echoes of discipline. You wash your face, your hands, your neck. The water shocks the skin awake. The towel is rougher than modern terry cloth, but clean, sharply folded, useful. Your hair is brushed into order. Any trace of sleep must be removed, but not with indulgence. This age had little patience for languor, unless languor could be made to look fragile, feminine, and well-bred. Soon dressing begins, and dressing in Victorian England was never just dressing. It was arrangement, it was classification, it was a conversation between body and society conducted through layers of fabric. Buttons, stays, collars, gloves, and all the unspoken rules attached to them. If you are a gentleman, the process is rigid without being overtly theatrical. Shirt first, bright and freshly laundered, the front smooth and severe. Collar, detachable, perhaps fastened, into place with the cool certainty of something that will not forgive carelessness. Waistcoat selected according to hour, season, and respectability. Trousers carefully pressed, braces, socks, boots already blacked and waiting. Coat brushed one final time, even if no dust can be seen. Hair parted with deliberation, whiskers, if you wear them, must not look wild. A gentleman might claim he dresses for practicality, but Victorian practicality was often only another style of ceremony. If you are a lady, the ritual becomes more elaborate, more physical, and more revealing of the age's ideas about virtue, posture, and restraint. The first layers are innocent enough: chemise, stockings, petticoat, linen close to the skin, the softness closest to the body hidden beneath everything more visible. Then comes the corset. Much has been said of corsets, and some of it exaggerated, but not all. In the Victorian imagination, the corset was not merely a fashionable shaping device. It was discipline made material. It promised support, order, self-command, and silhouette all at once. A body properly laced seemed a body under control, and control was one of the great moral obsessions of the century. So you stand still while the laces are drawn. The corset itself is stiffer than any modern garment designed for comfort. Whalebone, steel, cording, sturdy fabric, all arranged to guide the torso into the approved line. The maid pulls and settles and smooths. You breathe in, then out. The garment closes around you like a decision, not unbearable, not if fitted reasonably and worn regularly, but unmistakable. The breath sits a little higher. The waist narrows. The ribs learn again the small daily discipline of inhabiting fashion. It would be simple to laugh and say the Victorians loved to punish themselves, and often they did seem strangely attached to inconvenience. But the feeling of the corset was more complicated than that. For many women, it also meant adulthood, readiness, presentation. The difference between the private self of the bedroom and the visible self of the drawing room. Like gloves, or bonnets, or calling cards, it was one more way of saying, I know how to belong to this world. Over the corset come more layers, petticoats, bustle perhaps, depending on the decade, skirt, bodice, hooks, eyes, pins, a collar, cuffs. The body disappears beneath careful geometry. The mirror reflects not simply a person, but a role. Hair is next, brushed, parted, pinned, arranged. A few soft wisps may be allowed near the face, depending on fashion. Age and daring. But too much softness suggests looseness, and looseness was dangerous territory in a society that trusted severe lines more than spontaneous charm. Jewelry is selected with care, pearls perhaps, or a brooch, or a modest chain, nothing too bright before the proper hour. Morning dress should speak of propriety, not triumph. By the time you are fully dressed, the body has been translated. It no longer looks private. It looks legible. That more than beauty alone was the point. Victorian dress announced where you belonged, or where you hoped to belong, or how badly you feared belonging nowhere at all. Now you may leave the bedroom. The corridor outside has already entered its daytime life. A maid moves quietly with folded linen. A door opens at the far end and closes again. From below rises the faintest scent of breakfast and coal and polished silver. The house is a system now, not just a shelter, and each room participates in its own small aspect of the morning's order. You move toward breakfast. Victorian breakfast, in a respectable household, is not the relaxed domestic softness that later paintings might suggest. It is calmer than dinner, certainly, and less ceremonial than a formal evening, but it remains full of meaning. Table habits were among the most visible signs of breeding, and breeding, in the broad social sense of the word, was the age's favorite invisible badge. The dining room holds the pale authority of early light. A sideboard glints, cups and saucers wait, toast stands in a rack rather than flopping indecently onto a plate. Silver spoons lie in place with an almost moral neatness. A family portrait looks down from the wall, with the sort of fixed expression that suggests approval is possible, though unlikely. Seats are taken according to custom, a father at one end, perhaps a mother at the other. Children arranged with instructional care, servants pass in and out as needed. A household of modest means may be less elaborate, of course, but even there, the rituals remain. Respectability did not belong only to the rich, it belonged to anyone anxious enough to pursue it. Breakfast begins. Eggs, toast, perhaps kippers if the family is unafraid of the smell. Porridge, tea, coffee, marmalade, butter, bread, a little fruit if it can be afforded. Every item comes with expectations. Toast should be buttered neatly, not gouged or hacked. Eggshell must be opened with delicacy. Spoons are not interchangeable. Sounds must be kept soft. Elbows stay off the table. Reaching is vulgar. Reaching is vulgar. Asking for something should be done with measured politeness. Taking too much too quickly looks greedy. Eating too slowly looks affected. It is astonishing how much moral information can be loaded onto a spoonful of porridge when a culture is determined enough. Conversation at breakfast is usually restrained. The weather is safe. The garden is safe. Mild remarks about the household schedule are safe. Politics is unwise. Money is crude. Bodily complaints are unwelcome. The Victorians were deeply interested in health, nerves, digestion, and medical catastrophe, but they did not want any of those subjects near a plate of eggs if they could possibly avoid it. And then there is posture. Breakfast posture, like every other posture, matters. A body that droops suggests weakness, disorder, or insufficient training. A body too stiff suggests self-consciousness. The ideal is a curious middle ground, the age prized. In almost all things, enough ease to imply confidence, enough restraint to imply virtue. Even crumbs have social meaning. One fallen crumb can be ignored. A pattern of them implies carelessness. A spill requires apology but not drama. A dropped spoon must not become an event. Victorian table manners were designed partly to prevent mess, and partly to prevent anyone acknowledging too plainly that human beings, left to themselves, are gloriously and embarrassingly untidy creatures. You finish breakfast not full exactly, though you have eaten, but instructed, and the day has barely begun. If the household is a prosperous one, then after breakfast, the work of hygiene must be confronted. Here again, the Victorian world reveals its gift for turning the practical into the oddly ceremonial. Bathing, to modern minds, seems one of the simplest facts of daily life. You turn a tap, water appears, heat appears, privacy appears. In the Victorian house, none of these conveniences can be taken for granted. Water must be hauled, or heated, or carried. Tubs must be brought. Rooms must be prepared. Drafts must be considered. Privacy must be negotiated with screens, doors, servants, and the geometry of the house. More importantly, the age's ideas about the body make bathing not merely a practical issue, but a moral one. The Victorians valued cleanliness, yes, but they also feared excess, display, bodily indulgence, and anything that looked too closely like sensual pleasure. A brisk wash was sensible. A long, luxurious soak could become suspicious in the wrong mind. Too little washing might be slovenly. Too much might be self-indulgent. This was a century that loved moderation so much, it turned moderation itself into a kind of fever. So the washstand remained central. Face and hands must be kept clean. Neck, ears, and visible skin must not betray neglect. A full bath, depending on class and household resources, may be weekly, less than weekly, or a laborious special event requiring advanced thought. Water is heated downstairs and carried up. The tub is set in a room where it fits badly. Towels are arranged. Soap appears. Screens are placed. A maid helps, unless modesty and household type make that impossible or undesirable. The experience is rarely effortless. The water cools. The room drafts. The tub itself may be tin or metal, neither grand nor especially comforting. And yet, even here, the Victorian eye for ritual intrudes. Fresh linen laid out afterward, hair brushed, powder, scent, the body restored to public acceptability by a procedure far more cumbersome than it needed to be. Many people, especially outside the wealthy classes, relied far more on the daily strip wash than on immersion. A basin, a cloth, water, soap if available and welcome, clean visible parts, then move on with one's life. A great many modern assumptions about universal daily bathing would have seemed wasteful, impractical, or even unhealthy to much of the 19th century. The Victorians did not imagine dirt exactly as we do. They feared miasmas, chills, bad air, weakened constitutions, and sudden vulnerability produced by the wrong amount of exposure. Hygiene sat inside a whole ecosystem of belief. Still, whatever the method, the result sought was not freshness alone. It was respectability. That same desire spills into the rooms themselves. Victorian interiors are famous for many things. Clutter, drapery, dark wood, patterned wallpaper, stuffed furniture, and decorative determination. But behind the heavy abundance lies another important impulse. The home was expected to be moral, not merely tidy moral. Rooms should suggest order, propriety, duty, gentility. This is where stories of table legs and little coverings enter the popular imagination, half joke and half symbol of something very real. Whether every family literally dressed its furniture in modesty garments is less important than what the image captures. It captures a culture so alert to symbolism that the home itself became a lesson in self-restraint. A respectable drawing room is never bare. Curtains frame windows. Piano tops hold framed photographs, shells, flowers under glass, or books with serious bindings. Chairs are upholstered. Carpets spread over floors. Lamps wear fringed shades. Mantels bear ornaments. Every object says something, and saying nothing was unacceptable. Emptiness could feel vulgar because it looked unfinished, and unfinished things threatened the Victorian imagination with the possibility of disorder. Even a table seems to have a role in this world. It must stand correctly. It must support not only objects, but the visual argument of the household. A piano is not just for music. It proves cultivation. A fern in the corner proves taste and care. Antimacassars on chairbacks protect upholstery, but also signal decency. The room becomes a portrait of the family, even when the family is absent. And in such rooms, once the practical duties of mourning are past, amusement may cautiously begin. Parlor games are one of the gentler oddities of Victorian domestic life. They reveal how badly the age wanted fun, and how unwilling it was to trust fun when left unsupervised. People gathered in drawing rooms after tea or in the evening. Chairs were arranged. Lamps glowed. A fire burned. Someone proposed a game. And what followed was often less spontaneous delight than a polite contest in cleverness, self-command, memory, performance, and not making a fool of oneself more openly than the hostess's nephew. Charades were popular, but Victorian charades could become elaborate little spectacles, full of literary references and cryptic clues. The minister's cat asked players to supply adjectives in alphabetical order, which sounds harmless until the alphabet grows long and minds grow blank. Consequences let each person write part of a sentence and pass it along unseen, producing nonsense that was often the nearest respectable people got to open laughter. Blind man's bluff survived from earlier eras and always threatened to turn dignity into furniture collisions. Forfeits demanded little tasks or performances from those who lost, and these could drift anywhere between charming and faintly mortifying. Yet the room around the games remains very beautiful in the mind. Firelight, upholstery, teacups perhaps not yet cleared away, shadows moving softly on wallpaper, the odd pressure of being watched by older relatives who are themselves pretending not to mind any impropriety so long as it is contained within the approved borders of an evening at home. What matters here is not the game alone, but the atmosphere of supervised play. The Victorians did not object to amusement. They objected to amusement escaping structure. Fun had to be framed, managed, classed, and made safe for family life. The parlor was both playground and court of judgment. And if a drawing room could judge you, the street could judge you too. Stepping outside in Victorian England meant moving from the private grammar of the house into the public grammar of class, gender, pace, and visibility. Streets were not neutral spaces. They were read constantly. Who walked where, with whom at what hour, in what clothes, and with what expression mattered. One did not simply go out. One appeared. The body changes outdoors. Indoors you are arranged by furnishings and ritual. Outdoors you are framed by weather, traffic, strangers, mud, fog, shop windows, and the terrifying fact that anyone might see you. The Victorians, who valued reserve so highly, built an enormous culture around the management of being seen without seeming to invite attention. A gentleman walks at a reasonable pace, neither loitering nor hurrying. His hat is correct. His gloves are appropriate if he meets an acquaintance. The nod or hat tip must be calibrated to the relationship. Too hearty a greeting suggests either vulgarity or hidden intimacy. Too little acknowledgement suggests a slight. A lady must walk respectably, usually accompanied where custom requires, and never with the sort of free, unstructured motion that implies she belongs to the streets rather than merely passing through them. There are puddles, always puddles, especially in the great cities. Mud too. Horse traffic leaves the road with its own opinions about cleanliness. Skirts must be managed. Boots must be protected. A gentleman may offer a hand at a crossing, but the gesture is not innocent. Nothing was innocent in a culture so trained to read motives. A proper lady cannot simply sprint through filth or leap over danger. A proper gentleman cannot seem too eager to rescue strangers. The result is a whole theater of delayed crossings, adjusted hems, measured assistance, and internal dread. Shop fronts line the way. Hatters, stationers, florists, confectioners, booksellers. It is pleasant to imagine them, if we imagine them slowly. Under grey sky or thin afternoon light. The air damp, wheels passing, a bell above a shop door. Glass fogged slightly from warmth within, goods displayed with care because display itself was one of the age's great talents. The street belongs to social visibility, yes, but also to the changing mood of the day. After morning duties and before evening formality, the city hums in a lower register. One can walk and feel, beneath all the rules, the real life of the century pressing close. Newsboys, clerks, governesses, market women, carriages. A policeman at a corner, a dog that belongs, apparently, to no one and everyone. Respectability is a layer placed over all of this movement, not a replacement for it. Eventually, after walking or calling or shopping or paying some necessary visit, the day reaches one of its softest points. Afternoon tea. Tea in Victorian England was more than refreshment. It was a hinge in the day, a pause between public obligations and the evening's more formal face. A small island of ritual within a larger ocean of ritual, but gentler, more domestic, more upholstered. The home gathers itself around tea. Curtains shift, light lowers. The room grows warmer as the sun begins to fall. Servants bring the tray. Porcelain appears. The teapot settles into place. Cups wait. Saucers gleam. Sugar tongs lie ready with almost comic seriousness. And yes, tea has rules. Of course it does. Milk or tea first. Sugar or lemon, stir quietly. Never clink. Lift cup and saucer correctly. Take small bites of sandwich or scone. Do not devour. Do not lick. Do not reach. Do not slurp. The Victorians could turn hydration into a moral test with breathtaking speed. But for all that, tea remains comforting to imagine. Steam rising. Late light through the curtains. The delicate sound of china. Tiny sandwiches, trimmed so neatly they seem more decorative than nourishing. Scones, jam, cream, all carrying quiet regional loyalties and household preferences that can be defended with more intensity than certain matters of parliament. A little talk about literature, weather, music, visitors, the cat, the vicar, the season, anything safe and graceful enough to sit beside a teacup. Tea is one of the great return to safe moments in Victorian life. Because however complicated the day has become, tea insists on a smaller scale. The room is enough. The cup is enough. The company, even if mildly exhausting, is familiar. The body rests in its chair. The gloves may come off. The nerves settle. Even anxiety, at tea, must sit politely. Yet not all Victorian rituals were meant to soothe. Some were meant to display grief. Mourning in the Victorian age became one of the most elaborate emotional systems in the modern West. Loss had always had customs, of course, but the 19th century layered grief with strict timetables, visual codes, textile rules, social withdrawals, and a whole economy of appropriate sadness. To modern eyes, it can seem suffocating. To Victorians, it also offered structure at the very moment life had become structureless. A death in the family did not simply bring sorrow. It changed clothing, visits, mirrors, music, outings, jewelry, and the very palette of the house. Black appeared, or rather, black deepened, crepe, bombazine, jet, veils, muted textures that seemed to swallow joy on contact. A widow might spend months or years moving through formal stages of mourning, each with its own permitted shades and limits. Too rapid a return to color suggested coldness, too prolonged a display could suggest theatrics. The sweet spot, as ever, lay somewhere in the middle, and was easier to judge in others than in oneself. The house changed too. Some families covered mirrors, clocks might be stopped, at least symbolically, visits became restricted, invitations declined. Music hushed. The whole domestic scene acknowledged absence by becoming more still. Grief was both private and spectacularly visible. You wore it on your body, whether or not your heart was ready to be seen. The strange beauty of mourning customs lies in their material detail. A brooch containing a lock of hair, a letter edged in black. A dress so heavy with black crepe that it seems to drag the body toward solemnity. Curtains kept dim, a room in which laughter arrives and then quickly apologizes for itself. This age liked to place feelings under discipline and mourning is perhaps the clearest example. It could be oppressive, it could be performative, it could also be a comfort. If grief was too large to master, one could at least master the veil. Third, the visit, the correct duration of withdrawal. Ritual did not erase sorrow, it gave sorrow something to wear. Social life resumed eventually, through one of the century's most delicate tools. The calling card, a small object, astonishingly powerful. Thick paper, engraved name, correct size, proper font, a border if suitable, no vulgar excess. To leave a card was to participate in the entire social machinery of recognition. You did not simply knock and chat in respectable circles. You announced yourself through paper first. Paper made contact safe. Paper created distance. Paper turned the dangerous unpredictability of human visits into a sequence the Victorians trusted. A card can say, "I called." A card can say, "I acknowledge you." A card can say, "I offer condolences." A card can say, "I continue to exist in your social orbit and expect not to be forgotten." Cards are delivered by hand, but often not by the person whose name they bear. They are received by servants. They rest on trays in hallways. They are sorted, returned, ignored, discussed. Corners may be folded to indicate different meanings. Timing matters, quality matters. Even the state of your card tray can become a small portrait of your social health. A full tray suggests a thriving network. An empty tray can look, in a nervous household, like failure arranged in silver. There is something charming in this paper choreography, and something faintly sad too. So much feeling reduced to pasteboard and timing, yet, in a society afraid of improvised intimacy, the calling card was brilliant. It allowed everyone to signal without overexposing themselves. Where words themselves felt risky, another language bloomed. Flowers, florography. The language of flowers is one of those Victorian inventions that seems at first too quaint to be real and then too complicated to be entirely sane. Each flower could carry meaning, each color could shift it. A bouquet became not just a bouquet but a sentence, a confession, a refusal, a warning, a sigh in petals. A pink rose might suggest gratitude, a yellow bloom might hint at jealousy or fading feeling. Rosemary promised remembrance, ivy clung, basil disapproved. One could, in theory, send an entire emotional paragraph to someone's drawing room and never say a word. Of course, this opened the door to misunderstanding, which the Victorians, despite their passion for rules, remained magnificently capable of creating. A suitor might send the wrong combination, an aunt might decode too much, a hostess might display flowers too publicly, and thereby expose a private message to a whole afternoon of tea guests. A wilted arrangement could look like neglect, a lavish one could look like vanity or ambition, or, in the wrong context, pursuit. Yet the image remains lovely, a conservatory warm with light, green leaves against the glass, a bouquet placed just so on a side table, a woman reading meaning into color while pretending not to, a young man choosing flowers at a shop with more anxiety than any rail investor. This is Victorian emotion at its most characteristic, hidden, coded, material, and hovering always between sincerity and social danger. Even outside the house, these systems of discipline continue into work. The Victorian office, at least in its respectable middle-class forms, had its own etiquette, no less sharp for involving fewer candles and more ink. Desks are arranged, ledgers aligned, pens set in order, inkstands placed correctly, blotting paper ready. A clerk's handwriting becomes almost a moral portrait. Precision matters, neatness matters, tone in correspondence matters, deference to superiors matters. One does not sprawl at a desk any more than one sprawls at breakfast. Even the body bent over paper must remain legible as diligent, controlled, deserving. The soundscape is different here. No silver, no teacups perhaps. Only scratch of pen, rustle of paper, coughs politely suppressed, footsteps, pages turned, the occasional bell or summons. Windows may be high, air may be stale, coats hang nearby, lunch is brief, plain, and not the point. The office is a room where personality is thinned into penmanship and punctuality. There is no romance in the actual labor for most people. Monotony dominates, yet even this monotony fits the age. The Victorian world trusted repeated forms, a ledger line, a calling card, a properly folded napkin, a carefully copied letter, each expressed the same deep love of order that shaped the home. Children, meanwhile, were being trained into that order almost from infancy. Victorian childhood in respectable families could be affectionate, but it was rarely casual. Children were expected to become self-governing beings through a constant gentle pressure of example, correction, routine, and surveillance. They were dressed carefully. They were taught to sit still. They learned table manners young. They were discouraged from noise, disorder, and anything too bodily in company. Their clothes themselves often mirrored adult expectations in miniature. Buttons, starch, little boots, ribbons, collars, tidy hair. Breakfast at a nursery table might be supervised by a nurse or governess who cared as much about posture as porridge. Lessons followed: reading, writing, scripture, geography, languages, needlework, music, all depending on class and gender. Recitations, copybooks, handwriting, memory, moral stories. Children were expected not simply to know things, but to know how to present themselves while knowing them. When visitors arrived, children could be summoned briefly, like polished evidence of the household's success. A son or daughter enters the drawing room, bows, curtsies, says the proper thing, perhaps recites a line or answers a question, then disappears again. To the modern eye, it can all seem too ornamental, but to the Victorian mind, children were apprentices in social life. Training began early, because society itself was always thought to be one wrong gesture away from embarrassment. Of course, behind this discipline, real childhood still existed. Mud, whispers, giggling, hidden frogs, scuffed shoes, secret stories, wild inventions under nursery tables. But publicly, the child was expected to shimmer with restraint. Seen, not heard, and certainly not sticky. That same training extended naturally into courtship. Victorian romance has a glow about it from a distance. Letters, gloves, moonlight, flowers, pianoforte evenings, long engagements, meaningful glances over teacups, and all of that was real enough. But what gives it its peculiar flavor is how intensely supervised it all could be. Love, in this world, was not allowed to arrive barefoot and direct. It needed introductions, chaperones, proper rooms, correct hours, letters read or at least suspected by others, and enough decorum to keep scandal from taking root before the wedding breakfast. A young man does not simply declare himself. He is introduced, he visits, he calls, he speaks to the family. He may walk with the young woman, but rarely alone. He writes letters whose meaning often hides beneath weather and literature and moral seriousness. A young woman replies with equal care. Glances matter, so do pauses, so does the length of a call, the frequency of one's visits, the bouquet sent, the books recommended, the way a conversation lingers over safe subjects, because the unsafe one is too large to touch plainly. It is sweet in its own constrained way, and constraining. Hands must not brush too obviously. A room must hold witnesses, or at least the possibility of witnesses. Physical desire, though very much alive, is dressed in metaphor and protocol until it can scarcely breathe. Yet perhaps that is why surviving letters from the era can feel so charged. When a culture forbids directness, even slight warmth becomes incandescent. Once an engagement is formal, things loosen slightly, but only slightly. Gifts may be exchanged, visits become less nervous, futures begin to take shape in furniture. Linens, property, settlements, church dates, and all the practical machinery by which romance was eventually converted into household. And in the household, affection could attach itself not only to humans but to pets. The Victorian love of domestic animals fits beautifully with the rest of the age's contradictions. Pets were adored, and also disciplined, pampered, and also expected to behave. A lapdog in a drawing room became part accessory, part family member, part test of household order. A cat might be cherished for grace and composure, so long as it did not disgrace itself on the curtains. Birds sang in cages in parlors, where every other living thing had been taught to moderate itself. Even a hedgehog could become a fashionable little curiosity in the right home. What makes Victorian pet keeping distinctive is not the mere presence of animals, but the way those animals were absorbed into the moral atmosphere of the house. A well-behaved dog reflected well on its people. An unruly one did not. Ribbons, collars, cushions, monogrammed bowls, all might appear, especially in prosperous households, but so did the expectation that animals not embarrass the family. Bark softly if you must, shed invisibly if you can above all. Do not become the subject of gossip in company. This sounds ridiculous, and it is, but it also reveals something gentle. Behind all the anxiety of etiquette lay a domestic tenderness the Victorians rarely admitted openly in words. It appears in photographs, in letters, in mourning for pets, in little collars and small graves, and portraits of spaniels painted with the same seriousness once reserved for bishops. By the time Christmas arrives, all these strains in Victorian life, duty, comfort, performance, family, religion, restraint, warmth, gather into one of the century's most enduring seasonal moods. Victorian Christmas gave the modern English-speaking world much of what it still recognizes. The tree, domestic glow, cards, gifts, family gatherings, moralized cheer. Yet even here, the age could not entirely resist codifying joy. The tree should be tasteful, decorations charming but not vulgar, candles magical, but preferably not catastrophic, gifts useful, sentimental, moderate, games permissible, but not anarchic, songs moving, but not rowdy, dinner plentiful, but not indecent in appetite, laughter acceptable, provided it keeps one eye on dignity. And still, despite all that restraint, Christmas softened people. A tree in the corner, with paper ornaments and little candles, oranges, ribbons, simple handmade decorations, a drawing room warmer than usual. Goose or turkey perhaps, pudding flamed at table, greeted with pleasure carefully contained. Children, a little more visible than on ordinary days. Carols, crackers, small practical presents wrapped in the language of affection rather than display. It is one of the rare moments when Victorian domestic life seems not merely controlled, but genuinely comforted by its own customs. Perhaps that is why the season lasts so strongly in the imagination. It reveals the best side of the whole complicated order. Ritual as warmth, repetition as belonging, home not as a stage for constant judgment, but as a lamp-lit shelter from winter, the street and the century's harsher demands. And now, after all these rules, all these rooms, all these garments, cards, cups, flowers, veils, ledgers, gloves and glances, the day begins to lower itself toward night. Lamps are lit, curtains drawn more fully, the dinner things long since cleared away, the hallway quiets, the fire settles. A household that seemed so full of codes by daylight grows mercifully simpler after dark. The body returns upstairs, boots come off, gloves are laid aside, pins are removed from hair, collars loosen, the corset is unlaced, and with it some portion of the day's performed composure. That perhaps is one of the truest hidden pleasures of Victorian life. Not the ball, not the tea tray, not the elegance of the drawing room when guests are present, but the private moment at the end when the body reclaims itself from all the visible structures of respectability. A bedroom lit by one lamp, the washstand waiting again, a basin, a brush, a folded nightgown, the quiet after performance. The room no longer asking to be read, the Victorians spent extraordinary energy arranging life against awkwardness. They arranged clothing against looseness, table manners against appetite, cards against social uncertainty, flowers against dangerous speech, mourning against wild grief, tea against afternoon collapse, children against untidiness, courtship against desire, rooms against emptiness. And some of that arrangement was oppressive, no question. Some of it was vain, some of it was comic, but some of it was also human. Because beneath the rules, there was always the same old hope, that if one could compose the outer world carefully enough, perhaps the inner one would follow. That if a room were tidy, a collar straight, a card properly folded, a visit correctly timed, a cup correctly lifted, then life itself might become a little less precarious, a little less embarrassing, a little more bearable, of course. It never fully worked. No century has solved that problem. No amount of etiquette can keep sorrow from the house forever. No amount of black crepe can make grief neat. No amount of tea can erase loneliness. No amount of corsetry can transform anxiety into grace permanently. No flower arrangement can say everything one most longs to say. And yet people try. They tried in Victorian England. They try now. Only the props have changed. That is why, as the room darkens, and the blanket is drawn up, and the fire becomes mostly glow rather than flame, the age begins to feel less alien than it first appeared. Not because its customs were sensible, many were not, but because its anxieties were familiar. People feared being judged. They feared being left out. They feared saying the wrong thing, wearing the wrong thing, feeling too much, feeling too little, grieving badly, loving badly, dining badly, parenting badly, appearing ridiculous, appearing eager, appearing coarse, appearing weak. These are old fears. The Victorians only gave them more furniture. So now let the furniture fade. Let the drawing room empty. Let the card tray rest untouched in the hall until tomorrow. Let the piano sit beneath its cover. Let the flowers lower their heads a little in the dim room. Let the gloves sleep in a drawer. Let the collar unfasten. Let the corset give way. Let the parlor games go silent. Let the tea things cool. Let the street beyond the curtains become only a distant sound of wheels and wind, and maybe one late passer-by. Let the whole age, with all its discipline and drapery, settle down around you like dust in old lamplight. And from here, in the quiet, notice what remains, not the rules, not the judgments, not the endless little examinations of tone and posture and silverware and sleeves. Only the small comforts that survive them: warmth, privacy, a bed, a little darkness, a mind at last permitted to stop performing. You do not need to enter a room correctly now. You do not need to know which spoon is proper. You do not need to leave the perfect card, fold the perfect corner, wear the right shade of half mourning, choose the right carnation, or keep your dog from barking in the drawing room. You do not need to sit upright for breakfast under a portrait stare. You do not need to lace yourself into virtue. You do not need to be legible to anyone. The day is over. The age is over. The age is over. The house, for one soft hour, has released you. So if some last anxious thought remains at the edge of the room, tonight, let it be only a Victorian thought now, dressed in too many layers, carrying a calling card, worrying about tea, entirely overprepared for a judgment that never comes. And let it pass by. Let it move down the corridor. Let it fade with the firelight. Let it become a figure in an old photograph, still for a moment, then gone. Good night. May your room ask less of you than theirs asked of them. May your clothes be kinder. May your breakfast be freer. May your hands need no gloves for comfort. May your feelings require no codebook of flowers. May your grief, when it comes, never need permission to be real. May your love need fewer chaperones. May your sleep arrive without ceremony. And may you drift now, very gently, out of the lamplit parlours and curtained bedrooms of Victorian England, past the tea trays, the ribbons, the polished boots, the hedgehogs, the ledgers, the the veils, the roses, the table legs, and the thousand small rules, into the one quiet luxury no century has ever improved upon. Rest shadow, lenenkite mon mono, doga sui hong 11 stogung, betin tromnek, con on si, toivit leibondai, han oriati, keo en hampi pim han huon, va antem, tenyo elpisimo. Tonight, you are not simply drifting into a different century. You are drifting into a world built out of rules so fine, so persistent, and so deeply woven into daily life that even silence seems trained. Not the noisy Victorian age of factories, whistles, smoke, mud, and iron. Not the age seen from railway stations or crowded docks or newspapers, full of empire and anxiety. We are going somewhere softer than that, somewhere more upholstered, more shaded, more candlelit, more careful. We are stepping into the private rooms where that age tried to make itself look calm. You are in Victorian England now, and the first thing you notice is that almost nothing is casual. Not the curtains, not the fire, not the way a door is closed, not the way a chair is occupied, not the way tea is poured, not the way a person enters a room, or leaves one, or glances toward another human being, without accidentally suggesting too much warmth, too much ambition, too much ease, too much hunger, too much feeling, too much self. This is a society that trusted surfaces more than impulses. A society that loved order so much it wrapped it around the body, laid it across the table, folded it into notes, pinned it into hair, stitched it into dresses, trained it into children, and carried it out into the street. And so tonight, instead of hurrying through its strangest rules as if they were curiosities in a cabinet, let us live among them for a while. Let us wake here. Let us dress here. Let us eat and bathe and speak and walk and visit and court and grieve and keep tea and endure Christmas and survive a respectable drawing room without sneezing at the wrong moment. Let us be very still and very patient, and let the century unfold around us at the speed it preferred best, slowly enough for everything to be judged. You wake in the half-dark. The room is cool in the way old houses are cool, even when someone has tried to outwit the weather with curtains, rugs, layered bedding, and a guarded fire. The bed is narrower than modern comfort might like, yet somehow heavier in presence. It has a proper shape. It belongs to the room as solidly as the wardrobe and washstand and narrow little table near the chair. This is not a bedroom designed for sprawling self-expression. It is a room designed to hold a person in decent order. The curtains are thick, but not quite thick enough to keep out the pale first insistence of morning. Light gathers at their edges. It traces the outline of the wash jug, the curve of the basin, the brass of a candlestick, the edge of a boot. The wallpaper, still mostly shadow, is full of tiny repeating leaves or flowers or arabesques, as though even the walls have agreed not to make any sudden original statements. The air smells faintly of coal and lavender and starch. That combination tells you almost everything about the world you have entered. Coal because the century runs on fire and soot and labor. Lavender because private life still wishes to believe in gentility. And starch because respectability must be pressed into shape every morning before breakfast. You remain still for a few moments longer, wrapped in the last warmth of the bed, and listen. There is always a sound in a Victorian house before full day begins. Not one sound, but several softened into a kind of domestic hush. A faint tread in the corridor, a bucket moved, a door eased almost shut, crockery below stairs, the discreet labor of unseen people, trying to make the household appear as though it wakes on its own. If this is a comfortable house, then someone is already tending fires, carrying water, sweeping ash, checking the breakfast table, and making sure that when the family appears, the mourning will look as if it has naturally arranged itself into usefulness. But the mourning has not arranged itself. The mourning has been arranged for someone that perhaps is one of the deepest luxuries of the 19th century house. Not only softness, though softness matters. Not only fine curtains, though curtains matter too. It is the illusion that necessity has been persuaded to arrive, politely. A maid may come shortly, or perhaps you are in a household modest enough that no maid attends this room directly. Either way, the sequence is already waiting. The water jug, the towel, the brush, the folded underlinen, the shoes placed where shoes should be. Even the cold itself is organized, permitted only in tolerable amounts, and challenged at once by the little fire crackling behind its grate. You sit up, blankets slide down, the air touches your neck, the mattress shifts with a firmer resistance than modern bedding. You place a hand on the coverlet, its texture is slightly rough beneath the fingers, practical and made to last. Near the bed stands a chair with garments laid out or folded from the night before. A robe, perhaps a dressing gown, stockings rolled, a collar waiting with almost suspicious certainty. Nothing here has been left to chance. On the washstand, the basin gleams dully in the grey light. Beside it sits the pitcher, and beside that, a small dish of soap. Soap in the Victorian world always seems either too harsh or too praised. The century believed in cleanliness, but not in modern abundance. It believed in self-command far more than sensual bathing. Washing is to restore decency, not to indulge the body in pleasure. So the body is washed in parts, hands first, face, neck, perhaps arms, a cloth dampened, and passed over skin that wakes in stages. The water is cold enough to sting or lukewarm, if the household has made greater effort. The towel is rough but honest, hair is brushed, the face in the mirror slowly emerges from sleep into accountability. That mirror matters, not because you are admiring yourself. Victorian mornings do not begin with self-celebration. The mirror matters because it asks a question the whole age asks. Are you presentable yet? Are you arranged? Are you fitted to appear before others without causing them concern, offense, pity, curiosity, or gossip? The body in this era is never just a body. It is social text, and dressing is the act of writing it clearly. If you are a gentleman, your transformation comes through sharpness, line, and discipline. The shirt is not loose and forgiving. It is white, crisp, and declarative. The collar is detachable, perhaps, but that does not make it kind. It stands at the throat as though the century itself were holding your chin up. Braces are adjusted, trousers drawn on, waistcoat selected with careful understanding of what is suitable for the hour. Coat brushed, hair smoothed, boots polished to a surface that suggests a moral relationship with effort. No single garment is especially dramatic on its own. The drama lies in their collective message. Nothing is being put on thoughtlessly. Nothing hangs carelessly. Nothing suggests haste or fatigue or appetite. You are not merely clothed, you are controlled. If you are a lady, the process is longer, more layered, and more physically intimate with the demands of the century. The body is built into mourning, the way a room is arranged for callers. Chemise, stockings, garters, petticoats, corset, more petticoats, skirt, bodice, fastenings, cuffs, collar, hair, pins, perhaps a ribbon, perhaps a brooch, perhaps gloves set aside for later. Each step draws private softness farther inward and public composure farther outward. The corset, of course, sits at the center of all this. The corset has become such a symbol of the era that it risks turning into caricature. Yet it deserves the attention, not because every woman spent her life gasping dramatically against impossible laces, though certainly some suffered badly under fashion, but because the corset reveals the logic of the age better than almost any other garment. It promises order, it promises shape, it promises visible self-restraint, and the Victorian mind, especially in matters of gender, loved visible self-restraint more than almost anything else. The laces tighten, not brutally perhaps, not in the sensational way later retellings prefer, but enough. Enough to remind the ribs that fashion has expectations. Enough to alter posture, enough to change the body's relationship to breath, food, fatigue, and movement. Enough to make sitting a negotiation, and bending an act of strategy. There is a quietness in the room while this happens. A maid standing close behind, hands skilled by repetition, the tiny sound of eyelets and lace, the feel of fabric firming around the torso. A pause, another pull, another smoothing of cloth across the hips and over the bust. Then the bodice, then the skirt settling into its proper fall. Then the slight testing turn before the mirror. The woman reflected there now is not merely awake. She is prepared, compressed into legibility, made presentable for parlors, visits, meals, chance encounters, and the general surveillance of respectable life. The century liked to imagine that this kind of clothing revealed character. In truth, it often concealed discomfort, but concealment was one of its favorite arts. Even men, who liked to believe themselves immune from the more theatrical burdens of fashion, were hardly free. High collars, tight boots, stiff waistcoats, heavy coats, gloves, hats, canes, formal conventions of fabric and cut and hour. The male body, too, was organized into discipline. A gentleman might not faint from his clothing, but he was expected to wear civilization upon himself as surely as any lady wore her stays. By the time the dressing is complete, the room has changed. It is no longer the place of sleeping softness. It is now part of the household's daily machine. The bed has been straightened, the basin used, the brush laid down. The garments of night are folded away, and you, who a short while ago were only a warm breathing creature under blankets, have become a Victorian person fit to enter the day. You step into the corridor. The hall is cooler than the room. There is always a slight difference of temperature between spaces in old houses, as if each room keeps its own weather. A runner carpet stretches along the floor. Framed prints or portraits hang in measured intervals. Somewhere below comes the smell of toast or coffee or kippers, depending on household preference and courage. A servant passes, or perhaps you merely hear one at the turn of the stairs. Mourning in a Victorian house is never loud if the family can help it. Noise belongs to kitchens, workrooms, alleys, streets, stables. The domestic ideal upstairs is calm. Downstairs, the breakfast room waits. Breakfast should be simple, in theory. In practice, Victorian breakfast can feel like the first examination of the day. The table is neatly laid, napkins folded, cups and saucers aligned, toast kept in its rack as though even bread requires posture. Butter in a dish, preserves in small jars or pots, egg cups, spoons with their distinct functions, a teapot or coffee service holding itself with metallic dignity near the center or sideboard. The family portrait on the wall appears not to care, but it cares. Everyone has a place. Everyone has a correct way to sit in that place. Everyone has a correct way to unfold the napkin. Everyone has a correct way to request the butter. Accept the eggs, lift the cup, hold the spoon, decline more fish, and answer the mild question about the weather without sounding too cheerful or too melancholy. This was an age that could turn a boiled egg into a revelation of breeding. Toast is not merely toast. It must be transferred properly, buttered properly, eaten without greed, without shredding, without spraying crumbs as though breakfast were a battlefield. Eggshells must be opened neatly, not assaulted. Porridge must be stirred without visible hunger. Tea must be taken with awareness of sound. No clinking, no slurping, no chewing that calls attention to the body's basic needs. The great dream of Victorian table manners was to permit eating while pretending no one was really doing anything so primitive. Conversation hovers cautiously over safe ground. The weather, the garden, a planned visit, a letter expected, the vicar's sermon. Perhaps if it can be discussed in a way that does not imply criticism or enthusiasm. Children, if present, may speak when spoken to. and should do so in small, correct sentences that reveal instruction without revealing too much personality. The family cat, if lucky enough to belong to a household of some tolerance, may receive comment. Digestion must not. The body at table is always on trial. Straight back, controlled hands, no elbows, no reaching, no visible appetite, and beneath all that composure is the great soft absurdity of the scene. Everyone is just trying to eat breakfast without letting breakfast become too bodily. Yet it must be said that there is a certain beauty in the rhythm of it. The morning light on white cloth, steam from tea, the silver knife moving over toast, the hush of chairs over carpet, the passing in and out of servants, the faint aroma of coal fire, bread, butter, tea leaves, and polished wood. A whole civilization balancing itself on the edge of a side plate. When breakfast ends, one does not feel exactly fed in a modern sense. One feels positioned, corrected, readied, and still the day keeps asking for more. Now comes the question of cleanliness in earnest modern life. Takes bathing so much for granted that it can be hard to feel how complicated it once was. But in the Victorian world, where the body was so closely bound to modesty, health beliefs, class assumptions, and the sheer logistics of water, washing oneself could become a small domestic campaign. Public bathhouses existed, yes, but were not universally embraced by the respectable classes. There were anxieties about privacy, morality, disease, impropriety, and contact with the wrong sort of people. A home bath, if one could afford the fuel, labor, and time, seemed safer. Yet home bathing required its own infrastructure. Water had to be heated and carried. Tubs had to be set up. Rooms had to be warmed as much as possible. Curtains drawn, screens placed, towels assembled, privacy negotiated. The Victorian bedroom transformed into a bathing room always feels slightly embarrassed by the role. A metal tub in the middle of the floor. Steam rising only faintly because the water is already cooling. A maid trying not to look as she helps. A bather trying not to appear self-conscious in a culture built out of self-consciousness. Soap is present, sometimes harsh, often scented in ways that promise refinement while stripping the skin of any joy. Towels are ready, fresh linen laid out. The whole procedure is far from leisurely, unless you are very rich indeed, and prepared to claim a luxury that many moralists would regard with suspicion. The Victorian age believed in washing, but it did not entirely trust pleasure. A brisk rub at the washstand, a cloth and basin, a dry brush, powder, clean cuffs, fresh collars, these could all seem more respectable than lingering bodily delight in warm water. The body was to be maintained, not adored, and class changes everything here. A wealthy household can afford regular hot water, more privacy, more linen, more help, more soap, more time. A servant or laborer cannot. The poor wash when and how they can. At sinks, basins, pumps, in partial ways, with the same human need, but fewer means to satisfy it. Yet all classes absorb some version of the same lesson. Cleanliness reflects character, but not too flamboyantly. One must never seem dirty, but one must also never seem too fascinated with being clean. Such contradictory standards are among the century's favorite forms of discipline. They do not stop at the body, they spread into the home itself. Victorian interiors are famous for clutter, but clutter is too crude a word for what many households believed they were creating. They were creating layers of assurance, carpets over floors, curtains over windows, covers over chairs, antimacassars over chairback, cloth over tables, framed objects over wallpaper, ornament over emptiness. The room should suggest feeling without revealing too much feeling, order without looking barren, comfort without looking sloppy. The old joke about table legs needing modesty garments may be exaggerated in its broadest retellings, but it survives because it captures something essential. The Victorians really did fret about suggestion, symbolism, and propriety in ways that seem almost dreamlike now. Furniture could be draped, Pianos could be skirted, chairbacks could wear little protective cloths. The entire room seemed to sit correctly, just as the family in it tried to sit correctly. This is not only prudishness, it is anxiety translated into decoration. A room too bare looks neglected. A room too bright looks vulgar. A room too comfortable looks idle. A room too grand looks pretentious. The middle ground must be built, dusted, adjusted, and endlessly maintained. And in that carefully weighted middle ground, the parlor emerges as one of the most important emotional theaters of the house. The parlor is where visitors are received, tea is taken, daughters are displayed, sons are judged, music is made. Evenings are spent, and entertainment is offered under the strict supervision of taste. Parlor games belong here. One always imagines them beginning with a suggestion too cheerful to resist. A relative, perhaps, an aunt, a cousin, someone who is determined that the evening will be enjoyed whether or not anyone actually enjoys it. The fire is lit, chairs are drawn nearer, lamps glow, tea things have perhaps only just been removed. A small pause settles in the room. Then comes the proposal. A game. It sounds harmless. It is never entirely harmless, because Victorian entertainment is often a test disguised as diversion. Charades ask you to perform without becoming vulgar. Consequences ask you to be amusing without revealing too much. Blind man's bluff asks the furniture to survive your dignity. The minister's cat asks your vocabulary to show itself under pressure. Forfeits ask you to submit to a minor humiliation framed as cheerfulness, and then recover without visible resentment. All of it unfolds in the warm air of the drawing room, beneath the eyes of family and guests, and perhaps one elderly aunt whose memory for embarrassment is better than any archive. The room itself helps. Upholstery absorbs panic, firelight flatters awkward pauses, rugs catch footsteps, curtains make everything feel enclosed enough that small absurdities become survivable. It is easy to smile in such a room, even when internally one is begging never again to act out a 5-syllable abstract noun before cousins and clergymen. What matters in parlor games is not winning. It is surviving while remaining socially intact. That was true of much of Victorian life. And once you leave the parlor and go outside, the same principle follows you into the street. To modern eyes, a sidewalk is a sidewalk. To Victorian eyes, public space was full of signals. How you walked mattered. Where you walked mattered. How quickly you walked mattered. Whom you acknowledged mattered. Whom you did not acknowledge mattered too. The street is a place where class, caution, gender, and respectability brush shoulders without ever admitting that they have touched. If you are a gentleman, you must appear purposeful, but not hurried. If you are a lady, your presence in the street must be legible as respectable, not aimless. A governess on an errand, a daughter on a walk, a wife making calls, a man going to chambers, to church, to business, to his club. Each is read by dress and bearing before a word is spoken. The weather complicates everything. Victorian England is not kind to hems. Mud, rain, puddles, grit, horse traffic, smoke, and the general damp imagination of the island itself all conspire to make public movement a negotiation between dignity and contamination. A lady must lift her skirt only slightly, never too high. A gentleman may offer aid at a crossing, but aid itself has meaning, and meanings multiply in a culture trained to suspect implication everywhere. Eye contact is delicate terrain. Too much, and one risks boldness. Too little, and one risks oddness. Greetings must be exact. A nod for one person, a hat tip for another, a fuller bow or curtsy if rank demands it. To ignore entirely could insult. To greet too warmly could expose intimacy. And so, as in all things, moderation becomes not a pleasant ideal, but a survival skill. Yet once again, the street itself is lovely when imagined softly. A pale fog, horse hooves striking stone, a flower cellar near a corner, shop windows with gloves or ribbons or books arranged behind the glass, a child hurrying by under instruction, a clergyman moving with thoughtfulness through the damp air, a dog crossing where no dog should, a lady's skirt brushing the edge of a curb, a gentleman pausing before a stationer's window, the city full of rules, and still, despite them, alive. Eventually, the day bends back inward, and the inwardness of the Victorian day reaches one of its gentlest forms in afternoon tea. Tea deserves its reputation, not because it was universally relaxed, it was not, there were rules enough to disturb any calm mind, but because the ritual itself was structured around comfort. Comfort made respectable, comfort formalized just enough to be admitted by a culture uneasy about appetite. The drawing room in late afternoon has a mood unlike any other. Light filtered through curtains, shadows lengthening, but not yet heavy. Cushions plumped, a little table drawn close, a tray brought in with cups, saucers, teapot, milk jug, sugar bowl, perhaps lemon, perhaps not, depending on household preference and philosophy. A cake stand, or plate of sandwiches or scones, waiting with deceptive innocence. Tea asks for delicacy, the cup lifted properly, the spoon stirred in silent circles. No slurping, no clinking if it can be helped, no greed over the scones, no collapse into frank hunger, though everyone is plainly hungry. Milk first or tea first becomes not merely a habit, but a social confession. Jam or cream first may place one in the camp of county loyalties, not worth accidentally insulting. Sandwiches are handled lightly, napkins dabbed, not deployed. Conversation hovers over safely cultivated subjects, as though everyone has agreed that intimacy is best served in thin slices with the crusts removed. And yet, tea is genuinely soothing. The room is warm, the cup is warm, the hands are occupied, the body has permission at last to sit and do something small. Even the soundscape helps: porcelain, quiet spoon, the hush of me, fabric, the low soft exchange of remarks about weather, books, sermons, roses, cousins, visitors, the cat, the season. Afternoon tea is the age at its most manageable. A whole civilization made miniature, a little room, a little steam, a little sweetness, a little judgment. Yes. But tenderly arranged, still, not all Victorian rituals were tender. Some were severe in proportion to the feelings they tried to regulate. Mourning is the clearest example. When death entered a Victorian household, grief did not remain abstract. It became visible, it clothed itself, timetabled itself, hung in the wardrobe, sat in the hall, edged the letters, diminished the visiting list, darkened the mirror, covered the body in black, and asked the soul to keep pace. The culture of mourning in 19th century Britain could be astonishingly elaborate. Widows entered long stretches of full mourning, then half mourning, then cautious re-entry into color and company. Parents, children, siblings, more distant relations all had expected periods of visible sorrow, according to the closeness of the loss and the strictness of the family. Fabric itself was graded, crepe for the deepest phase, jet jewelry permitted, brightness prohibited, silk perhaps later, gray and mauve only when the calendar of sorrow allowed. To modern ears it sounds exhausting, and it was, but it was also, in its own logic, a way of proving the seriousness of feeling to a society that trusted symbols more than confessions. If grief could not be measured inwardly, it would be measured outwardly. In months, in hems, in veils, in who visited, in who did not, in whether the widow still wore matte black after the proper interval or had scandalously allowed a softer sheen to enter her wardrobe too soon. The house changes under mourning too. Music is reduced, social life shrinks, curtains may seem heavier, though perhaps they are not. A room once full of colas becomes sparse. Letters arrive edged in black. Flowers stand in still arrangements. The body moves through its days more slowly, not only because of sorrow, But because sorrow has been given such a wardrobe, there is something almost theatrical about it, yes. But there is also a tenderness in the desire to mark loss visibly, to refuse the ordinary world for a while, to let fabric say what the face may not manage. Victorian mourning is both constraint and permission. Constraint because it scripts the expression of grief so tightly. Permission because it allows grief to become the atmosphere of a life, not a private flaw to be hurried out of sight. And when the household begins to re-enter society, it does not do so abruptly. It does so through paper, calling cards, small, stiff, precise little instruments of social existence. A card is an announcement, without the peril of spontaneous conversation. A card says I have come, or wish to come, or remembered you, or expect to be remembered in return. A card can carry condolence, congratulation, obligation, presence. It can open a door or quietly confirm that a door has closed. The size matters. The printing matters. The cleanliness of the card matters. The case in which it is carried matters. The folded corner matters. Because folds themselves may signal whether the call was personal, formal, condoling, or otherwise coded by custom. In a world that feared social improvisation, the calling card was a masterpiece. Imagine the small scene. A carriage stops. A visitor does not barrel to the door and demand company. Instead, a servant receives the card. It rests on a tray. It is carried inward. Someone in the house decides how to answer. Perhaps a servant returns to say the lady is not receiving. Perhaps a later call is arranged. Perhaps another card will be sent in return. Perhaps silence follows, and silence itself becomes an answer. The hallway tray of cards becomes a tiny archive of rank and relevance. An empty tray can feel embarrassing. A full tray can feel reassuring. The silver card tray in a Victorian hall tells a story. No one is supposed to narrate aloud. This household matters. This one less so. This one has been remembered. This one perhaps has not. The age loved visible tokens of invisible status. And where cards failed to say enough, flowers stepped in. The language of flowers is one of the most enchanting and perilous things the Victorian imagination ever cultivated. It takes the ordinary pleasure of giving a bouquet and loads it with semantics until no blossom is innocent. A rose may speak. A violet may imply devotion. A basil leaf may rebuke. A yellow flower may cool affection. A white lily may suggest purity, or funerary quiet, or both. Suddenly, the conservatory becomes a lexicon. The Victorians adored this. Of course they did. It allowed emotion to remain coded. A bouquet could say what a respectable mouth should not. It could hint, it could plead, it could rebuke, it could flatter. It could misunderstand catastrophically. A young man arriving for tea with the wrong combination of flowers might seem a fool, a cad, or merely undereducated. A woman receiving flowers had to think not only what they meant, but where to place them. Visible enough to acknowledge, invisible enough not to publicize. Watered enough to show feeling, not too much attention paid lest one reveal that attention mattered. Florography turns a domestic object into a social trap, and also into poetry. Picture warm flower shop with damp stems and green smell. A nervous suitor, an experienced florist who knows far too much about the moral implications of carnations. A bouquet wrapped and carried into a gray afternoon. A maid opening the door. A drawing room later in the day. A spray of blossoms on a side table. One woman reading the room. Another reading the roses. The Victorians had so many feelings they would not say plainly. Flowers bloomed in the silence, and beyond drawing rooms and gardens. The same century carried its discipline into work. The office of the late 19th century is less decorative than the parlor, but no less ordered. Desks lined up, ledgers, inkstands, copybooks, blotters, the smell of paper, dust, ink, wool coats damp from weather, and a room occupied for long hours by men trying to look indispensable without ever appearing dramatic. If the home made respectability domestic, The office made it clerical. Penmanship matters here. More than a detail, it becomes character in motion. A neat hand suggests steadiness. A sloppy one suggests weakness, haste, lack of discipline. Correspondence is copied by hand or by laborious press. Errors stain more than paper. Superiors notice. Subordinates are expected to know their place as clearly as their blotting paper knows its own. The office sound is a thin one. Scratch of nibs, pages turned, chairs shifting, a cough, the bell for attention, a clerk carrying a ledger, a supervisor reading something aloud in a tone designed to discourage hope. It is monotonous, yes. It is also distinctly Victorian in its trust that enough structure and enough correct behavior can turn human time into useful order. Lunch is not relief, only interruption. A pie perhaps, bread, cheese, cold meat, tea, if possible, then back to paper and posture. The office is a room in which conversation becomes risk and handwriting, becomes destiny. At home, children are being shaped for a similar world long before they understand it. Victorian children, at least in the respectable imagination, are small beings under constant refinement. They are dressed with extraordinary seriousness, their hair parted, their boots polished, their little collars starched, their pinafores spotless, their bodies expected to produce no alarming evidence of mud, jam, grass, shouting, spontaneity, or unfiltered selfhood in front of adults. Breakfast at the nursery table repeats the same principles on a smaller scale. Sit properly, speak little, use utensils correctly, do not fidget, do not shout, do not mention bodily topics, lesson follows lesson. Reading, recitation, writing, copying, needlework, sums, scripture, geography, French perhaps, piano perhaps, everything timed, supervised and tied to manners. Children may play, of course, but even play is classified. Outdoor activity should not destroy clothing. Indoor activity should not destroy peace. When visitors come, children may be brought in briefly to demonstrate their grooming and instruction. They stand beside their mother or governess. They answer questions. They bow or curtsy. They perhaps recite a line. Then they vanish again. Return to the nursery where one hopes some remnant of true childhood survives. And it did survive. Behind the rules, Victorian children still collected insects, whispered secrets, invented games, dirtied hems, laughed too loudly, feared punishment, loved pets, despised grammar, and felt the same untidy waves of affection and boredom and envy and delight every child has always felt. But the age preferred not to meet childhood on those terms. It preferred to meet it buttoned. That same preference followed young adults into courtship. Victorian romance is full of longing, but longing in this world rarely travels unchaperoned. A young man and woman do not simply drift together by instinct. They are introduced, observed, measured, approved, or not approved. Their conversations take place in drawing rooms, gardens, walks, social visits, musicales, church gatherings, and every other setting designed to preserve propriety while permitting possibility. The beauty of it lies in the slowness. The frustration of it lies in the slowness, too. A look matters, because a look may be all one is allowed. A hand passing a cup matters, because fingers must not linger. A letter matters because letters can say what speech may not, though even letters are often composed beneath the eyes of family expectation and the rules of tone. Weather becomes a major romantic subject, because weather is safe and yet expansive enough to carry feeling by suggestion. Music too, books, flowers, scenery, the way a conversation pauses rather than what it declares. Everything trembles with implication, because almost nothing can be said cleanly. Parents, aunts, guardians, siblings, servants, neighbors, all hover around the edges of courtship like weather systems of propriety. A walk in the garden may be allowed, but not a walk too far from the window. A call may be acceptable, but not too often. A gift may be sent, but it must be modest, proper, not intimate enough to imply possession before engagement has done its work. When an understanding is finally reached, the relief must have been immense, because by then affection had been filtered through so many layers of supervision that even the thought of speaking plainly could feel scandalously free. And still, in these houses built from rules, tenderness found smaller outlets too. In pets, a household dog sleeping near the fire, a cat occupying a chair with more self-possession than anyone in the room, a bird in a cage singing into the afternoon, a little creature allowed, within limits, to be loved without strategy. Victorian pet keeping is charming precisely because it tries to civilize animals into the same moral atmosphere as everyone else. Dogs should be clean, quiet, correct, cats decorative, but not destructive, birds melodic, not disruptive. Even affection was expected to behave. Yet affection slips out anyway, in collars and ribbons, in little cushions, in special foods, in names repeated with softness, in grief, when a pet dies, in the way a cat is forgiven by one person after ruining what another has spent hours arranging, in the secret warmth a household can have for the one creature in it who knows nothing of calling cards. Then comes winter, then Christmas, and something loosens. Not completely, never completely. This is still a Victorian Christmas, which means joy must arrive in correct form. But there is permission here that ordinary days do not always grant. The family gathers, the drawing room brightens, a tree stands decorated with ribbons, paper ornaments, perhaps small gifts or candles if bravery exceeds common sense. Children become more visible. Food becomes more generous, gifts are exchanged. Carols may be sung, crackers snapped. Small laughter, permitted to rise a little higher than usual. The age that loved order also loved ritual, and Christmas gave ritual warmth. Goose or turkey, or beef if means allow, potatoes, puddings, mince pies, spices, citrus, evergreen, wax, firelight, the room full of the particular glow that comes only when winter cold presses outside and everything within has been pulled close. Even those stern old rules about moderation and restraint seem to soften around the edges. Not vanish, only soften. A father may become almost playful, a mother less supervisory for an hour, a child openly delighted, an aunt forgiving, a dog overfed, a servant carrying in dishes with a hidden smile. No rule quite suppresses. It is easy to see why Victorian Christmas survived so strongly in later imagination. It reveals what the age most wanted from itself, not just propriety. Belonging, continuity, fire against dark, family gathered inside ritual. A little excess temporarily forgiven, because it is framed by tradition. And then slowly, the day closes. No century can keep itself on stage forever, not even one so in love with costume, ceremony, and appearance. The lamps are lowered, the dishes cleared, the visitors gone, the fire reduced, the hall quiet, the dog asleep, the children sent up, the calling cards waiting for tomorrow, the flowers slightly drooping in their vases, the house, for one rare hour, less concerned with being seen. This is when Victorian life becomes most human. At the end, when the body returns to itself, boots removed, pins pulled from hair, collar loosened, corset unlaced, gloves set down, the face at the washstand less arranged, the room once more private, the person beneath all the public correctness re-emerging by degrees. That is the secret kindness hidden inside even the most rigid day. Eventually, it ends. Eventually, the role can be set aside. Eventually, the body is allowed to stop proving things. The Victorians spent extraordinary effort trying to make daily life legible. They wanted signals, signs, proper forms. They trusted the visible because the invisible feeling, appetite, fear, desire, grief, loneliness was harder to govern. So they governed breakfast, they governed collars, they governed cards. They governed the proper depth of morning black, and the proper sequence of tea and milk. They governed how children sat, and how adults visited, and how lovers wrote letters, and how even furniture should behave in a room. It all seems excessive, until one remembers how much of human life still feels uncertain. They were afraid of embarrassment, of scandal, of being thought coarse, of being thought ridiculous, of loving badly, of grieving badly, of climbing too high socially and falling, of not belonging, of failing to perform the self they hoped the world would accept. Those fears are old, very old. The Victorians only gave them lace cuffs, polished boots, and a stricter timetable. And perhaps that is why, as the room darkens and the bed waits, and the old century begins to drift gently out of focus, it also begins to feel familiar. Not because we would wish to live by all its rules, certainly not, but because we recognize the longing under the rules, the longing to appear composed when one is not, the longing to be approved, the longing to be safe from humiliation, the longing to have one's small world held together by forms that seem stronger than moods, the longing, finally, to be able to rest. So now, let the house grow quiet, let the breakfast table vanish, let the tea tray be carried away, let the card tray remain untouched in the hall, let the parlor games go silent, let the flowers keep their secrets, let the office close its ledgers, let the children stop reciting, let the lover fold the letter and put it away, let the widow's veil hang still, let the Christmas candles go dark, let the corset loosen, let the collar open, let the entire century, with all its strange rules and beautiful fabrics and narrow gestures and hidden aches, settle into shadow. And you do not have to remain inside it. You may leave it here, arranged in the dark like a room after guests have gone. You do not need the correct spoon. You do not need the correct card. You do not need the correct flower. You do not need to sit perfectly still, or keep your gloves on, or lower your eyes at the proper angle, or remember who must be called before whom, or whether your grief is mad enough, or your tea quiet enough, or your tea quiet enough, or your dog respectable enough, or your laughter dignified enough. You do not need to be legible. You do not need to be admirable. You do not need to perform gentility for the wallpaper. The day is over. The room is yours. The body can soften. The jaw can unclench. The shoulders can drop. The mind can stop writing its neat little lines across everything. And if one last anxious thought still lingers near the edge of your night, let it become a Victorian thought now. Too dressed, too careful, too worried about what everyone else might think, let it carry its calling card down the hallway. Let it bow politely to the darkness. Let it leave the room. Good night. May your bed be kinder than theirs. May your clothes be looser. May your breakfast be freer. May your tea be warm and unjudged. May your grief never need a timetable. May your love need fewer witnesses. May your home forgive disorder. May your thoughts require no etiquette manual. And may you drift now, very gently, out of the parlors and breakfast rooms and foggy streets and over-furnished interiors of Victorian England, past the table legs and glove boxes and flower meanings and striped proprieties and nursery lessons and club rules and family portraits, into the one simple mercy that neither the Victorians nor we have ever truly improved upon. Rest.